Yokoso owashitare, and welcome back to the continuation, the part 2 of a 4-part series. Yes, I'm calling it, it's going to be about 4 videos long, of a 4-part series on this one story, which I can only describe to you as a combination of ancient Japanese true crime and Cinderella. Was it Snow White? Cinderella, that one. So, in case you haven't seen part 1, I highly recommend you go check that out, else the rest of this is not going to make sense. I would offer up a little bit of a summary here, but since part 1 is basically everything that you need to know for the rest of this story to make sense, if you don't watch that, you probably aren't going to understand what's going on here. So please go check that one out. But with that all out of the way, let's just pick up where we left off. And because this is a continuation of a story, there is no Ima wa mukashi, once upon a time, okay? But picking up, after this servant man left the presence of her ladyship, the stepmother, he immediately went out to go find Taifunosuke's son. Surely he's got to be around here somewhere. I mean, this is the main house, this is where he lives. And this servant man quickly found the boy, who was by himself holding on to a miniature bow and a miniature quiver full of miniature arrows, obviously playthings for boys at the time. And this was a little bit unusual because usually this boy had friends all about him and was usually playing and roughhousing and doing whatever it was that ancient Japanese 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds did at the time. Now, when the servant man saw this boy, he immediately dropped to one knee, as was the normal thing to do, the deferential attitude that he was supposed to take, owing to the fact that this was his lord's son, this was the boss of the entire estate's son. And when this kid saw this servant man, he immediately came running straight over to him and posed him a question right out the gate. Hey, have you seen so-and-so? The text doesn't actually mention the name, it basically just says so-and-so. And this so-and-so was actually this kid's best friend, the friend that he spent almost all his time with. And this servant man, lying through his teeth, looked at this kid and simply said, "You know what, sir? I actually heard that he was off on a trip with his dad and he won't be back for some time. But tell me, my lord, why are you out here all by yourself?" And the boy answered, "Well, I was hoping to run into some of my friends and I was looking for all of them, but nobody else is here but me, so that's why I'm here all alone and I have nothing else to do." And at that, the servant man cracked a smile and he said, "Well then, sir, come along with me and I will take you to your uncle's house," which was definitely a better proposition than just hanging out at home alone with no friends. At least if he goes over to his uncle's house, his uncle's probably got a bunch of cool video games and stuff stashed away that he doesn't let the parents know about because he's the cool uncle that really likes his nephew. And so, of course, this kid, as soon as he heard this, instantly brightened up. He got a big smile on his face, and he was all about this, obviously. But he did tell this servant man, "Okay, but first things first, I gotta go tell mom about this." And this servant man, nodding, told him, "Okay, but just one thing, don't tell anybody else about this because I want this to be as much of a surprise as it can be, just to make it a little more fun." And of course, being the young, innocent child that he was, this kid was all for that. He immediately perked up, nodded his head, and he took off to go tell his mother that he was gonna go to his uncle's house. And as this servant man watched him running off, and seeing the way that his hair would bounce back and forth, because boys at this time did actually have long hair, and just the general innocent, delightful air that was about him, he began doubting what he was about to do. He began feeling very sorry for this kid. But he then remembered that her ladyship, the stepmother, was counting on him to take care of this, and he had promised her that he would do it, and he had promised that he would do a good job, and she had shown him so many favors that he couldn't back down now. She was relying on him to do this for her. And so, steeling his resolve and pushing aside his feelings of pity, he immediately set about travel preparations. He went and he got a horse, and also what he did is, as per usual when men traveled at this time and in this place, he equipped himself with a bow and some arrows. And picking up these weapons, he thought to himself, you know, I could dispatch this kid with sword or bow, but that would be too cruel, and I don't think I could stand that. So instead of having to witness his demise firsthand, I think what I'll do is I'll just take him out into a field and I will bury him out there. And then that way I don't have to be there and witness his actual expiration. And so, finishing up readying the horse and making sure that he did not bring any other guardsmen with him, which again was a little bit unusual for this time because usually the son or the family members of a nobleman would bring along guardsmen with them just in case something happened. And having finished all the preparations, he went to the place of meeting and he waited for this kid to show up, who did indeed show up after not a whole lot of time. and he came running in, still bearing his little miniature bow and his miniature arrows, and he told this servant man, "Okay, Mom said that I should just be on my way, so let's get going." And with that being said, he climbed up on top of the horse, and these two went off towards Uncle's house. Now, Uncle's house was about 500 yards away, so about 5 football fields long, or about 500 meters is, I believe, closer to what it actually was. So about half a kilometer, which was a decent distance. I mean, it was not just a hop, skip, and a jump away, but it wasn't crazy far. You know, you could probably walk that in 20 minutes, maybe not even that. But it was also far enough away that you would get to a point where nobody around you could see and nobody around you would know what was going on in that little in-between area. And the servant man who was leading this horse, and consequently the boy who was riding on top of this horse, very subtly but very casually veered off slightly and began walking. And they walked and they walked and they walked. And the story specifically says that they went about 4,000 yards, between 4,000 and 5,000 yards, so almost 10 times the actual distance it would have taken to get to Uncle's house. And eventually they came upon this really big grassy field. And it was a field that neither of them had really ever seen before. At the very least, the kid had never seen it before, and he started looking around and wondering why it was taking so long, and then coming into this field that he had never seen before, he began wondering and growing a little uneasy. And so he asked the servant man, "Hey, what's going on here? This isn't the usual way that we take to Uncle's house. Where are we going?" And the servant man simply responded, no sir, this definitely is the same pathway. Please just trust me." And maybe going about 20 or so more yards, 20 or so more meters if you don't measure in American units, he had the horse stop in the middle of this field and said, "My lord, let's stop here for a second, because down under the ground here there are actually some yams. Some yama no imo is specifically the name that they say in Japanese, but some yams here, and I want to dig them up and I want to show them to you." And the kid was not particularly pleased with this and very confused, and he's told this servant man, "What does digging up yams have to do with anything? Let's just go." And the servant man one more time looked at this kid, looked him dead in the face, and seeing the slight worry in his eyes and his general innocent demeanor, he once more began doubting himself. And he thought, what am I doing? I know that her ladyship, the stepmother, is relying on me to take care of this for her, but this is kind of ridiculous if you think about it. And I can only imagine how broken up the Lord Taifunosuke is going to be when he hears about this. And so, while grappling with some of these emotions, he took a second to once again steel his resolve and to take those feelings of pity and suppress them even further. And then I guess maybe to distract himself from these feelings of guilt that he had, he took a shovel and he began digging. And he began digging with some gusto and with some force. Now, I guess as far as this kid went, seeing this man start digging with such earnestness, and probably because he was a boy about that age where we are always suddenly seized upon by a desire to dig a hole for no particular reason, I actually did the same thing when I was about 12, 11 years old or so. And you know, hey, free yams, free food. We can get these and we can go take them to Uncle and Dad and show them that we dug up some yams, and they'll be like, "Oh, good job, that was great, that was wonderful." Whatever the reason was, this kid was suddenly no longer concerned anymore and kind of into this whole thing. And he began encouraging this servant man, saying, "Yes, go, dig those up. Let's get these yams. Let's get them. Show them to me." And you can imagine that this servant man, who was already harboring some doubts and already kind of struggling with the gravity of what he was about to do, seeing this kid's innocent excitement only served to make it harder for him. And he started thinking to himself even more, man, if I was directly serving under this kid, there's no way I could do this. This is making me feel too bad. And at this point, a couple of tears started falling from his eyes. And with his back turned to this kid, he hurriedly wiped them away a little bit, and then he chided himself for being so mentally and emotionally weak that he was going to be distracted from what he promised that he would do, and that he would be so weak as to cry over the death of some kid. However, despite chiding himself, he still had these feelings of guilt. But despite his feelings of guilt, he had still made a promise, and he was determined to carry this out. So, after finishing digging up this hole, he climbed out of it, and without looking this kid in the face because it was too much for him, he walked over to this horse, he grabbed the kid, pulled him off of the horse, and then he stripped him of his clothes, because these are nice clothes and it would be a waste to bury these clothes when you could like sell them and get a bunch of money for it. And then, taking this kid, he dropped him in this hole. And at this point, the kid realized what was going on. And so he shouted at this guy, "This is horrible. You're trying to kill me, aren't you?" And then, without looking this kid in the face, he immediately began filling this hole up as fast as he could with as much dirt as he could. And because he was so anxious and filled with so much guilt, he filled up this hole as fast as he could, patted it down with his feet once it was done, and he got out of there as fast as he could without making sure that everything was done properly. He couldn't stand to be there any longer than he had to, so he did the bare minimum, patted it down by stepping on it, and then he skedaddled on out of there. He did not want to be around here any longer than he had to. And I suppose the walk back to the estate allowed him to calm down a little bit, because after a bit of time he showed up once more, and he began wandering around like usual, like nothing had ever happened. And her ladyship the stepmother saw him come back, and she knew as soon as she met eyes with him that the deed was done. However, she was surprised to find that she didn't feel triumph, she didn't feel relief, she didn't feel like she had accomplished anything. In fact, the only thing she could think of was how when this boy came to tell her that he was going to go see his uncle, how he wrapped his arms around her neck and gave her a really big hug, and she could only see his face, his innocent, sweet little face, and just remembered about how wonderful of a child this kid was. And she began talking to herself in her brain. What is wrong with me? Am I crazy for thinking of something like this? Have I gone insane? This boy lost his mother long ago. And because of that, if I had treated him with the love and care that any mother would towards her son, he probably would have ended up loving me as his own mother. And furthermore, I don't have any sons. I only have my one daughter. But if word of all of this gets out, not only will it be the end of the line for me, but who knows what will happen to my daughter, for whom I'm doing all of this in the first place. And on top of all of that, the man who did this isn't particularly bright, and if he has made any sorts of mistake, I have no doubt that word will get out. And so, while she was wrestling with the guilt of what had just happened and regretting the choices that she had made, it was too late. The deed was done, and there was no going back at this point. And still bearing all of these terrible feelings of remorse and shame, and with no other recourse, she simply went deep into her own room, she shut herself off from everybody else and everything outside, and she began weeping. And, unfortunately, that is where I think I am going to end this story for now, because there is still a lot of the story to get through, and if I do the next part, then it's going to end up being a very long video, so we'll save that for its own, and then there will be one after that which will wrap everything up. So, if you want to be here to know how exactly everything pans out, because it likely will not pan out the way that you expect, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and if you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like the video. Or if you're a fan of Japanese history, Japanese culture, or just storytelling in general, please don't forget to do all of those things as well. And share with your friends too, of course. Share with your friends, your storytelling friends, your weeb friends, your Japanese cultural friends. Get the word out a little bit. But with all of that being said, if you've been watching all the way up to this point, I do thank you sincerely. Ito katajike no koso haberi kere. And hopefully we will see you in the next one to pick up where we left off here. Thank you so much once more. Goodbye, everybody.